Welcome back to another deep dive. We're diving into something pretty major in the helium world today.
Yeah, we are.
It's HIP 141.
Big changes.
This proposal is causing a lot of buzz, and for good reason. I mean, we're talking about streamlining helium's governance, right? Making the network much simpler to understand and use.
Exactly. That's the goal.
But it does make you wonder why such a drastic change is needed.
Well, I think the why comes down to some of the challenges helium's been facing with its current setup.
Okay, so challenges. Like what? Paint me a picture. What's so difficult about the current system? I mean, is it really that hard to navigate?
For some, it definitely can be. Even people who've been around helium for a while find it complex.
Really?
Yeah, so think about it. You've got separate subnetworks, IoT and mobile,
Right.
each with its own voting system.
Okay.
And then you throw in something called the DAO utility score.
Oh.
It's a lot to keep track of, a lot of moving parts. It's like trying to juggle 5 balls while riding a unicycle.
You're making my head spin just thinking about it.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming. And when something's that complex, it can be hard to understand how your actions actually impact the network.
So it's not just about it being confusing. There are real consequences to this complexity.
There can be. This kind of setup can create conflicting incentives.
Meaning?
It becomes unclear how participating, whether you're voting or staking or just holding tokens, how that actually influences the direction of the network.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the problem. And if experienced users are having a tough time with it, imagine what it's like for newcomers.
Exactly. It creates a barrier to entry.
So HIP 141 aims to solve all this by going back to basics.
In a way, yeah. The proposal puts HNT at the center.
HNT, you mean Helium's native token?
Yeah. They're proposing to make it the only governance token for the entire ecosystem.
Wow, so one token to rule them all. That does sound a lot simpler.
Right. No more juggling multiple tokens or trying to figure out which one does what.
But what happens to all the existing VIoT and vMobile out there? People have invested in those, right?
Absolutely. And the proposal addresses that. HIP 141 suggests unlocking all those positions.
Unlocking meaning.
Holders would be able to convert their VIT and vMobile back to regular HNT if they choose.
Oh, so it's like a token swap.
Kind of, yeah. You trade in your old, confusing tokens for the new, streamlined HNT.
Makes sense. But let's talk about the governance process itself. How does HIP 141 propose to change things, to make decision-making clearer and more efficient?
That's where the Helium release process comes in.
Okay, what's that?
Imagine regular, predictable upgrades, kind of like when your phone gets a software update.
But for the entire Helium network.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of sudden, unexpected changes, there's a clear roadmap for what's coming.
So everyone knows what to expect and can plan accordingly.
Precisely. It brings stability and transparency to the network.
No more flying by the seat of our pants. I like it. But what about the folks who are already actively involved with Helium, like participating in governance and earning rewards? What changes for them?
Well, there are some big changes proposed for how rewards are earned and distributed under HIP 141.
Now we're talking. Everyone wants to know about the rewards. Spill the tea. How will things work in this new system?
Remember that single HNT governance token we talked about? That simplicity carries over to the reward system, too. HIP 141 introduces something called the protocol score.
Protocol score. Another score to keep track of.
Hold on, this one's actually much simpler. It basically decides how rewards are split between the IoT and mobile subnetworks.
Okay, so instead of that complicated DAO utility score, we have this new protocol score. And how's it calculated?
It all comes down to veHNT delegation. It's like voting with your stake. The more veHNT delegated to a subnetwork, the bigger its share of the reward.
So it's a popularity contest, but with real money on the line.
You could say that. And to make things even more interesting, there's also this new HNT delegation rewards pool.
A dedicated pool just for rewards. Tell me more.
It's funded by a portion of HNT emissions, and it's specifically for people who actively participate, who delegate their veHNT and vote on proposals.
Ah, so you can't just sit back and collect rewards anymore. You have to actually get involved in the governance process.
That's the idea. You got to be engaged to be rewarded. You need to have voted in at least 2 of the last 4 votes to qualify.
Interesting. It seems like the overall theme here is simplify, streamline, and incentivize.
Exactly.
But let's take a step back for a second and recap what we've learned about HIP 141 so far.
Okay.
We've talked about moving to a single governance token, HNT, simplifying the governance process with a clear roadmap, and revamping the reward system to incentivize active participation. Sounds like a pretty big overhaul.
It is. It's a big shift.
And you mentioned that the protocol developers are putting out a more detailed roadmap along with this HIP. What will that tell us?
Think of it like a blueprint for the future of Helium. It lays out how all these changes will be implemented.
Okay, so what kind of specific upgrades are we talking about? Give us the highlights.
Well, the first big milestone is slated for January 2025. This initial release focuses on finalizing many of HIP 141's core concepts.
Such as?
Well, for one, they're aiming to fully implement HIP 138. This means all network rewards will be issued in HNT.
So that's when we see the shift to a single token model. No more separate IoT and mobile emissions.
Exactly. And it's not just about the emissions. Rewards to Helium network token holders will stop, and that HNT will be redirected back to network participants.
Okay, so that's a big change. What about that DAO utility score we were talking about earlier? It's being replaced by the protocol score, right? When does that happen?
That's another key change coming in the January 2025 release. They're getting rid of that complicated DAO utility score, which was based on all sorts of different factors.
Yeah, it was a bit of a mess.
It was. And in its place, we'll have the much simpler protocol score, which is solely based on veHNT delegation.
So starting January 2025, the way rewards are split between IoT and mobile depends entirely on how much veHNT is delegated to each. And that's where that 6% HNT delegation rewards pool comes in, to incentivize people to delegate their veHNT and vote.
Exactly.
Okay, so January 2025 is going to be a big month for Helium.
Yeah.
A lot of these core changes from HIP 141 will be implemented then.
It is. It's a significant milestone. But it's important to remember that this is just the beginning.
There's more to come.
Oh, yeah. The roadmap also outlines some potential upgrades for future releases, some pretty major changes that could have a big impact on the network.
Such as? Give us a sneak peek. What's on the horizon?
Well, they're talking about cross-protocol upgrades, things that would affect the entire Helium ecosystem.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of cross-protocol upgrades are they considering?
One idea is to migrate all token-specific stakes, locks, and fees to HNT.
Wait, are you saying things like service provider stakes, which are currently paid in IoT, would switch to HNT? And hex boosting fees, which are paid in mobile, would also switch to HNT?
Yes, precisely. The goal is to unify everything around HNT to simplify the economic model of the network.
I can see how that would make things much easier to understand. What else is on the table for these cross-protocol upgrades?
Another interesting concept is fractional rewards delegation.
Fractional rewards. What does that mean?
It would allow hotspots or subscribers to delegate only a portion of their rewards, giving them more flexibility and control.
Ah, so instead of having to delegate all your rewards to one subnetwork, you could split them up and support different initiatives.
Exactly.
That does sound interesting. What else are they looking at?
Well, on a more technical level, they're talking about improving the reliability of automated epoch calculations.
Epoch calculations. Sounds complicated.
It's basically the process that determines how rewards are distributed. They want to make sure that process is as accurate and reliable as possible.
So no more reward glitches or discrepancies. Good idea.
Right. And then there's the idea of automating reward claims, so it's easier and more convenient for users to get their rewards.
Makes sense. Anything else?
They're also looking at simplifying the initial onboarding process, making it easier for new users to join the network.
Okay, so it's not just about making the network more functional. It's about making it more user-friendly as well.
Exactly.
So we've got these cross-protocol upgrades that could potentially impact the entire Helium ecosystem. But what about the individual subnetworks? IoT and mobile, are they being left out of the mix?
Not at all. Each subnetwork has its own set of potential upgrades outlined in the roadmap.
Okay, good to know. So what's in store for mobile, for instance?
One idea they're considering is adjusting mapping rewards to incentivize specific types of mapping.
So encourage people to contribute the data that's most valuable to the network.
Exactly.
Smart move. What else is being considered for mobile?
There's also verification mapping.
Verification mapping.
It involves creating a coverage map specifically for carrier planning.
Ah, so giving potential partners a clear picture of Helium's coverage strengths. That can be really useful for attracting new partnerships and growing the network.
Exactly. And they're even thinking about expanding mapping beyond Helium mobile subscribers.
So allowing anyone to contribute to the coverage map.
Yeah. That could lead to even richer and more accurate coverage data.
Wow, a lot of interesting possibilities for mobile. What about on the IoT side? Any notable upgrades planned for that subnetwork?
One idea is to migrate the denialist classifiers to a community-managed process.
Denialist classifiers.
Basically, it's a list of devices that are not allowed to access the network.
Okay, so They're thinking about giving the community more control over which devices can and cannot use the network.
Yes, it's about decentralizing that decision-making process.
Interesting. What else is being considered for IoT?
They're also looking at updates to multi-station gateways.
Gateways.
It's a software that runs on Helium gateways. Those are like the backbone of the network.
Okay, so updates to improve the efficiency and reliability of the network's core infrastructure.
Precisely. And they're looking at adding support for LoRaWAN 1.1 with session key filters.
LoRaWAN 1.1.
It's an updated version of the protocol that powers the IoT network.
So basically, making the IoT network more secure and robust.
Exactly. And finally, they're considering some adjustments to the data pricing model.
Data pricing. That's a hot topic in the Helium community.
It is. Some people feel that the current pricing model needs to be tweaked to better reflect the value of the network.
Interesting. So these are some of the potential upgrades that are being considered for both the IoT and mobile subnetworks.
Yes. But it's important to remember that these are just proposals. Nothing is set in stone yet.
Right. These are just ideas for discussion. The Helium release process ensures that all proposals go through a rigorous review and voting process before they're actually implemented.
It does. It's all about transparency, collaboration, and community involvement.
This is a lot to take in, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. Can you help us break it down and explain why this is all so significant? What does it really mean for the future of Helium?
Well, I think what's really fascinating about HIP 141 is that it goes beyond just technical adjustments.
Right.
It's about a fundamental shift in how the Helium network operates and evolves.
So it's bigger than just a few tweaks here and there.
Much bigger. It's about moving away from this fragmented, complex system that we have now to a system that's more unified, streamlined, and most importantly, community-driven.
So a more decentralized and democratic Helium network.
Exactly. One where everyone has a voice and can participate in shaping its future. And I think that's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I can see why people are so excited about this proposal. It's not just about making the network more efficient, it's about giving the community more power and control.
It is. By simplifying governance, clarifying the roadmap, and incentivizing active participation, I think HIP 141 has the potential to unlock a whole new level of growth and innovation for Helium.
I'm starting to get the bigger picture now. This is about setting the stage for a more vibrant, resilient, and truly decentralized Helium network.
And one that's more accessible, engaging, and rewarding for everyone involved.
I'm definitely feeling more optimistic about the future of Helium after hearing all this.
Me too.
This has been a very insightful deep dive. I feel like I've learned a lot about where Helium is headed.
Likewise.
And I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
Hopefully.
But before we wrap things up for today, let's make sure our listeners know how to stay informed and get involved in this conversation.
Engagement is key, especially with HIP 141 being just a proposal right now. It needs the community's support to become a reality.
So for everyone listening, if you want to learn more and have your say, be sure to check out the full HIP 141 proposal on GitHub. We'll include a link in the show notes.
And don't be shy about joining the conversation. Share your thoughts, ask questions, make your voice heard.
You can find all the relevant links in the show notes, including links to forums, Discord servers, and social media groups where you can connect with other Helium enthusiasts.
It's a vibrant and welcoming community.
And remember, the future of Helium is being shaped right now, and your participation matters.
It does. So get involved, make your voice heard, and help build the Helium network of tomorrow.
Well said. This has been another great deep dive episode. Big thanks to our expert for taking the time to break down HIP 141 for us.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive into HIP 141.
Stay tuned. You know, we were talking about the transition from the old system to the new one with HIP 141. I think that's one of the most interesting parts.
Yeah, we talk about how holders of veHNT and vMobile can unlock their tokens and convert to HNT.
Right.
But what about all the votes that are already locked in? What happens to those?
Well, once HIP 141 is enacted, there won't be any more VOT or vMobile votes.
So that's it. The old voting system just shuts down.
Pretty much, yeah. Think of it like closing the book on the old way of doing things. The lock function on those positions would be deactivated, so holders can redeem the underlying IoT or mobile tokens whenever they want, no matter the lock or cooldown period.
Okay, so a clean break from the past.
All right.
But speaking of the future, how does HIP 141 approach that? It's not just about fixing the present, right?
No, definitely not. HIP 141 is all about building a foundation for a stronger Helium network, one that can adapt and grow. The roadmap they've laid out gives us a glimpse into some really exciting possibilities.
Okay, well, don't keep us in suspense. What kind of upgrades are we talking about? What's on the horizon?
Well, let's start with cross-protocol upgrades. Those are the ones that could impact the entire Helium ecosystem.
Okay, give us an example.
One really intriguing concept they're exploring is migrating all token-specific stakes, locks, and fees to HNT.
So everything would be based on HNT. That's pretty ambitious.
It is, but it makes sense if they're trying to simplify things.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
Could you give us a more concrete example of what that would look like?
Sure. Imagine things like service provider stakes and hex boosting fees, which are currently paid in IoT and mobile, all switching over to HNT. It would streamline the whole economic model of the network.
Yeah, that would make it much easier for everyone to understand.
Exactly.
What other cross-protocol upgrades are they thinking about?
Well, there's something called fractional rewards delegation.
Fractional rewards. That sounds interesting. What's that all about?
It would basically give hotspots and subscribers the ability to delegate only a portion of their rewards instead of having to delegate everything.
Oh, so they'd have more control over where their rewards go.
Exactly. More flexibility.
Okay, I can see how that would be appealing to people. What else?
They're also talking about improving the reliability of automated epoch calculations.
Epoch calculations.
That's the process that determines how rewards are distributed.
Right, right. So they want to make sure that's working properly.
Exactly. No one wants to deal with reward glitches.
For sure. Anything else on the cross-protocol front?
Yeah, they're also thinking about automating reward claims.
Ah, so people would get their rewards automatically.
Yeah, basically. Make it more convenient for everyone.
That'd be nice. What else?
And then another big one is simplifying the onboarding process. Make it easier for new users to get started with Helium.
Okay, so it's not just about improving the technology. It's about improving the user experience as well.
Exactly. Make it as easy as possible for people to join the network.
So those are some of the cross-protocol upgrades that are being considered. But what about the individual subnetworks, IoT and mobile? Are they getting any love in this roadmap?
Oh yeah, they haven't been forgotten. Each subnetwork has its own set of potential upgrades outlined in the roadmap.
Okay, good to know. What's in store for mobile, for instance?
Well, one interesting proposal is to adjust mapping rewards to incentivize particular types of mapping.
So encourage people to contribute the data that's most valuable to the network.
Exactly. Make sure that the mapping efforts are focused on the areas that need it the most.
That's a smart approach. What else are they thinking about for mobile?
There's also this concept of verification mapping.
Verification mapping. I haven't heard of that one.
It basically involves creating a coverage map that's specifically designed for carrier planning.
Oh, so it's like a way to show potential partners where Helium's coverage is strongest. Yeah, that could be really helpful for attracting new partnerships and expanding the network.
That's the idea.
What else?
Oh, and they're even considering expanding mapping beyond just Helium mobile subscribers.
So anyone could contribute to the coverage map.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
It would allow them to collect even more data, get a more complete picture of coverage.
Okay, so lots of exciting possibilities for mobile. What about IoT? Any big changes planned for that subnetwork?
One idea that's being floated is to shift denialist classifiers to a community-managed process.
Denialist classifiers.
Yeah.
Refresh my memory on what those are.
It's basically a list of devices that are not allowed to access the network.
Right, right. So they're thinking about giving the community more control over which devices can use the network.
Exactly. Decentralize that decision-making process.
Interesting. What else is in the works for IoT?
They're also looking at updates to multi-station gateways.
Gateways.
Yeah, that's the software that runs on Helium gateways.
Oh, right. Those are essentially the backbone of the network.
Yeah, they're crucial for the whole system to work.
So these updates are about improving the efficiency and reliability of the network's core infrastructure.
Exactly. They're also looking at adding support for LoRaWAN 1.1 with session key filters.
LoRaWAN 1.1.
That's the underlying protocol that powers the IoT network.
Okay, so basically making the IoT network more secure and robust.
Yep, that's the goal. And finally, they're considering some potential adjustments to the data pricing model.
Ah, data pricing. Always a lively topic in the Helium community.
It is, for sure. There's been a lot of debate about whether the current pricing model is sustainable and whether it needs to be adjusted.
Yeah, I've heard those conversations. So those are some of the potential upgrades that are being considered for IoT and mobile.
Yeah, just a taste of what's being discussed.
Lots to think about.
There is. But remember, these are just proposals. Nothing's finalized yet.
Right, right. It all has to go through that Helium release process that we talked about earlier.
It does. Thorough review, community feedback, and then a vote before anything is implemented.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Cross-protocol upgrades, subnetwork-specific improvements. It's clear that HIP 141 isn't just a quick fix. It's a long-term vision for the future of helium.
Absolutely. They're thinking big picture with this one.
And what's so exciting about this proposal is that it really puts the community in the driver's seat.
Yeah, it gives them a lot more control over the direction of the network.
But I have to admit, with all these potential changes, all the technical details,
Yeah.
it's easy to lose sight of why this matters. What's at stake here?
Well, I think at its core, HIP 141 is about creating a more decentralized and democratic helium network.
Okay, when you say decentralized, what does that actually mean in this context?
It means shifting control away from a centralized entity and giving more power to the community.
So instead of having a small group of people making all the decisions, the power is distributed among a larger group of users.
Exactly. It's about empowering the people who actually use the network to have a say in how it's run.
I can see how that would be a good thing. But what does that mean for the average helium user? What's in it for them?
Well, a more decentralized network is inherently more resilient.
Resilient, meaning,
It's less vulnerable to things like censorship, manipulation, and single points of failure.
so it's more secure and stable.
Exactly. And for users, that means greater control over their data and their earnings.
Okay, that makes sense. But isn't there also something to be said for the innovation that can come from a decentralized network?
Oh, absolutely. When you have a large, diverse community of people all contributing ideas and working together to solve problems, you get a lot more creativity and innovation than you would with a centralized model.
Yeah, it's like the wisdom of the crowd, right?
Exactly.
So HIP 141 is about more than just technical upgrades.
Right.
It's about creating a network that's more resilient, more innovative, and ultimately more valuable for everyone involved.
That's the vision. Yeah.
This has been incredibly insightful. I'm
Yeah.
really starting to understand the potential impact of this proposal.
I'm glad to hear that.
But before we move on to part 3, I want to make sure that our listeners know where they can learn more about this and get involved in this conversation.
Yeah, engagement is key, especially since HIP 141 is still just a proposal at this point.
It needs community support to become a reality.
Exactly. So for anyone who's listening and wants to learn more, I encourage you to check out the full HIP 141 proposal on the Helium GitHub repository.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes.
And don't just read it, engage with it. Leave comments, ask questions, get involved in the discussion.
The Helium community is really active and welcoming.
It is. There are forums, Discord servers, social media groups where you can connect with other people who are passionate about helium.
Right. There's a whole ecosystem out there.
There is.
So if you're interested in this, don't be shy. Dive in, explore, and help shape the future of helium.
Exactly. The future is being built right now, and your voice matters.
Well said. Now let's take a quick break and come back for the final part of our deep dives into HIP 141. All right, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into helium's HIP 141.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. From helium's current governance challenges to the solutions HIP 141 proposes. And even touched on the potential long-term impact, right?
We've been through it all. Simplifying tokens, streamlining upgrades, boosting participation. I mean, it's a pretty big deal.
It is. It's a potential turning point.
Exactly. And as we close out this deep dive, I think it's important to step back and consider the bigger picture.
Okay, yeah.
What does all this mean for the future of the helium network? How might these changes affect its growth and adoption?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about all the potential benefits, the increased security, stability, and innovation that a more decentralized network could bring.
Right, and a more user-friendly network, hopefully.
Right, exactly. But will it actually lead to greater adoption? Will we see more developers, businesses, and everyday users flocking to helium?
Those are the questions we need to be asking.
They are. Will a simpler, more decentralized helium be the key to unlocking its true potential?
We can't predict the future, but it's definitely exciting to think about.
It is. I think we're at a crossroads with helium. HIP 141 represents a bold move toward a more community-driven future.
A future where the users have more power and control.
Exactly. And that has the potential to change everything. It could reshape the entire wireless landscape as we know it.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive. Thanks again to our expert for guiding us through it all.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We hope you found this deep dive informative and engaging.
We sure did.
And remember, if you want to learn more about HIP 141 and get involved in the discussion, be sure to check out the links in the show notes.
Yeah, the helium community is a great place to be. Lots of passionate people, lots of great conversations happening.
And if you have any suggestions for future deep dives, be sure to let us know in the comments.
We're always looking for new topics to explore.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the world of technology, science, and innovation.
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.